This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I hope you all had a happy holiday. I hope you all had a good, New Year's, everything like that. We got a lot to talk about in today's episode. Before I start talking anything sports, I want to remind you all of a couple of things. First of all, please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. You can do it really easily, really quickly. Just go to the main page of our show, the GSMC Sports Podcast, and whatever you're listening to this on, Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you'll see probably in the top right-hand corner-ish, or maybe even dead center, a little button that just has a plus sign next to it and also says subscribe. If you could hit that button for us, that would mean the absolute world to us. You want to subscribe to the podcast for a couple of reasons, but the main one being you want to get those alerts and those notifications on your phone, on your laptop, on your watch, on whatever device you might be listening to this on. And again, you'll get those alerts and notifications, and you'll know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast. When we release it, you won't have to go look at Twitter or just go, check casually. You'll get those alerts whenever they are released, and then you can, be one of the first people to listen to a new episode again when we release it. So please, if you could subscribe to the podcast on our main page, whatever application you or even website you're listening to this on, Spotify, Apple Music, Podbean, please subscribe to us on all those great platforms. We would really appreciate it. Again, please subscribe to the podcast. Also, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general if you are enjoying the content and discussion points of the show, the production, everything that goes on behind the scenes with our great team as well. So if you're just enjoying the show overall, we'd love it if you leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general on that same main page, on that same website or application. Again, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Podbean. You can leave us a review. If you want to write something, you can do that as well, but as long as you just leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, we would really appreciate that if you are enjoying the content of this show just in general. So again, please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a positive review or just a 5-star review, in general, anything like that. And also, if you could give us a follow on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us. Just overall, we would love to interact with you guys more on there. So if you follow us on all of those great social media platforms, again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Over on social media, we can talk about sports. We can talk about, maybe some NFL playoff games, maybe whatever the main NBA game is on that night on TNT or ESPN. But just overall on social media, we can talk to you guys, again, about sports breaking news, about anything sports related that you guys want to talk about. Social media is the place to do that, especially in real time. Again, with the, landscape of the NFL and NBA always changing, player movement, games happening, trades, injuries, whatever it may be. Social media is the best way to find our immediate reaction, maybe, or something like that. So again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us, and we would absolutely love it. In addition to subscribing to the podcast and leaving us that review, if you could follow us on all those great social media platforms. One more time, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I hope wherever you are and however you may be listening, you and your family are happy, healthy during these extremely trying times in the world today. We have a fantastic show for you all today. Coming up later on in the show, I want to do another version of the QB Carousel segment I did a few weeks ago. But this time I want to make it more of an official prediction. We have a better idea now of who needs a quarterback and who doesn't. We've had some reports about some teams that might be interested in the Carson Wentz sweepstakes, the Deshaun Watson rumors. So we can make more of an accurate prediction about what teams could be making some plays for quarterbacks versus just pure speculation off of fits. So I'm going to be doing more of a predictions version of the QB carousel later on in the show. I'll go through each and every team that is most likely going to have a quarterback change and tell you who I am predicting will be the week 1 starter for that team next season. That's coming up later on in the show. And at the very end of the show, I want to explain to you why I do believe the Los Angeles Lakers are still the best team in the NBA, but I have a concern that they are too LeBron James reliant and why they could flame out at the end of this very weird NBA season. Also why this deadline might be a lot of fun as well when it comes to the NBA trading deadline. That's also potentially coming up soon as well. So we're going to talk about that at the very end of today's episode. But of course, we're going to start off with the Super Bowl between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm sure you all know by now Tampa Bay won the game, and it was pretty much a blowout from start to finish. 31-9 was the final score. The defense was obviously incredible for Tampa Bay, completely shutting Patrick Mahomes down. Defensive coordinator Todd Bowles obviously did an incredible job with the cover 2 defense they were playing, bringing 4 at a time, with the defensive line of Tampa Bay really dominating the backup tackles for Kansas City. Shaq Barrett, JPP having incredible games, and you could have made the argument that the defense as a whole, including Devin White, Antoine Winfield, Levante David, deserved that MVP award. Of course, Tom Brady had a GOAT-like performance, 3 touchdowns, 2 of them to Rob Gronkowski, 1 of them to Antonio Brown, leading the team to a Super Bowl victory, their 2nd Super Bowl in franchise history, and of course, Tom Brady's 7th Super Bowl championship, and I think he has cemented his legacy even further. I've told you I believe he is the greatest football player of all time. I think before the game he settled himself as the greatest quarterback of all time. What I do believe that Tom Brady officially sort of, accomplished with that win over the Kansas City Chiefs, of course, in Tampa Bay for the Buccaneers. I believe Tom Brady has solidified himself, no argument in my opinion, as the greatest team sport athlete of all time. He plays in a sport, football, that in my opinion is the hardest to create a dynasty in out of the 4 major sports. We've seen baseball dynasties, basketball dynasties, and of course basketball dynasties as well with baseball. We haven't seen a lot of football dynasties over a consistent period of time, and even so, the Patriot dynasty lasted a better part of 20 years, and that's what Tom Brady had in New England, and then continued his own personal dynasty a year further. At least at this stage, he's obviously not retiring anytime soon, according to himself. I think he'll play at least till 45, if not beyond then. He has more football championships than any other franchise in the NFL. Again, that's including great franchises and sports iconic, organizations, some of the biggest name brands in just, in the world. He has more championships than the Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers and the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Green Bay Packers and the Chicago Bears and the New York Giants. These famous, iconic organizations and teams. Tom Brady, an individual man, has more championships than any of them in football. Obviously, he has another one over Michael Jordan now. Also did it with a different organization, with a different team. Literally, they used to be called the Succaneers. They went 7-9 last year with pretty much this exact same roster, this exact same coaching staff. The only additions made were Antoine Winfield, any rookie, so Tristan Wirfs, him, obviously, and they also had Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski come in along with Antonio Brown. But for the most part, specifically on the coaching side of it, this Tampa Bay Buccaneer team has been together before, and they were a non-playoff losing season team last year. But add Brady, add Rob Gronkowski, add that winning culture, and all of a sudden they are a Super Bowl team, and in my opinion, they should be the favorites going into next season as well. I think they will only get better. And the crazy part is, it's incomprehensible, because when we watched Tom Brady play for years and years in New England, we said, well, Bill Belichick is the coach of that team. He is the greatest football coach of all time, maybe the greatest coach in professional sports history. He is a brilliant defensive mind, and the Patriot way of always finding these guys in the later rounds or who are undrafted or turning veterans into superstars and making everybody reach their max potential and getting rid of them a year early before a year too late, that whole mantra didn't exist. It's not a real thing. That's just Tom Brady. That is the Tom Brady way. The Patriot way that we know and that a lot of Patriot fans obviously love, that got them a dynasty for 20 years, was Tom Brady. Tom Brady was making all of those offenses work with different receivers, with guys like Wes Welker, with Julian Edelman, with Deion Branch back in the day, guys like that, and of course the rotating room of tight ends when Aaron Hernandez was there for a long time, of course Rob Gronkowski until he retired and things like that, and he carried that offense. No matter who was there, he found a way to win. He won with a rushing dominant offense, with a pass-happy dominant offense, offense, with a West Coast system, with a play-action system now in Tampa Bay. He's won with everything. He is the winning culture. He is the winning foundation. He is the winning way, and it's not anything that has to do with the New England Patriots or Bill Belichick, or really, to be honest with you, Bruce Arians and the Tampa Bay culture. It has everything to do with Tom Brady, and I understand that it's hard to comprehend why this one man gets so much credit now for something he didn't get credit for years ago. When we talk about the Patriot dynasty, before, in my opinion, this Tampa Bay Buccaneers season, everybody said it was at least 50-50 Tom, 50-50 Bill, and a lot of people thought it was more Bill than Brady, because of course Brady was pick 199, he was the 6th round pick, he wasn't even supposed to be starting in the NFL. It had to be the Belichick system. It had to be, again, the Patriot way. But the Patriot way was Tom Brady's will and determination to keep his body healthy, to be the best and most accurate and most surgical precision passer maybe we've ever seen in the game of football, and just being addicted to winning and doing whatever it takes to win the football game. And that's all he did in New England, and now that's all he's doing in Tampa Bay. He can transform any team, apparently, any organization, into a Super Bowl caliber level team, and he's doing it at age 43. He's going to play next season at 44, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's thinking that he has a potential dynasty on the rise in Tampa Bay. Now, will the dynasty in Tampa Bay, if he so far succeeds this like I believe he potentially can, will it rival the New England success? No. Tom Brady doesn't have 20 years left of playing football, but Tom Brady arguably could play till he's 47 or 48 years old, maybe play another 3 to 4 years. And if you win 2 to 3 championships in the next 3 to 5 years, in football, a lot of people would consider that a dynasty or a super team and something along those lines. And Tom Brady could be having one of those in his mid to late 40s, again, just cementing he is the greatest team sport athlete of all time. I don't want to make the argument that he's the greatest athlete of all time. I understand that was circulating on Twitter a lot, but it's just hard to compare him to people like Serena Williams and Simone Biles and Michael Phelps in completely different sports and completely different, pretty much environments. I understand that we can make the argument that, and I'm making the argument that Tom Brady's the greatest team sport athlete of all time, but it's hard to compare a team sport athlete to an individual athlete that has to deal with so many other different variables and factors. So I won't make the case that Tom Brady is the greatest athlete of all time. It's hard to compare him to, again, people like Serena Williams, Michael Phelps, Simone Biles, or some of these other people as well, these incredible athletes that have obviously been some of the best of all time in their respective sports. But at the end of the day, I do think Tom Brady now with 7 championships, leaving New England, going to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and creating them into a Super Bowl powerhouse team that went, to New Orleans and beat Drew Brees, then 2 Aaron Rodgers in Lambeau, and then Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. Everything that Tom Brady has ever been doubted on, has ever been, claimed that it's too easy in the AFC and he has a cakewalk division and he doesn't face any all-time great talents in the playoffs. He's always had an easy schedule. He's always had the defense. Tom Brady silenced all that this year. He went to a new environment with no training camp, no OTAs, made it work with a plethora of weapons, a coaching staff that had never coached in the big game. Bruce Arians had never coached in a Super Bowl until this year, was a wild card team, beat an all-time, probably top 5 passer ever, Drew Brees, then beat another potentially top 5 all-time passer, Aaron Rodgers, both in their buildings, when you could argue that they had worse rosters than the two, had not been as good as the two in years past. Obviously, the Buccaneers were nowhere near the level of Green Bay or New Orleans the past 3 to 5 seasons until Tom Brady showed up. And then to beat Patrick Mahomes, who had never lost a game by double digits, to hand Patrick Mahomes, some people were calling him on the pathway to potentially becoming the greatest football player of all time, because he looks like the GOAT. You saw the throws that he was making in the Super Bowl, practically levitating off the ground horizontally. Patrick Mahomes looks like the greatest player of all time. He acts like the greatest player of all time. He makes crazy plays like the greatest player of all time should. Tom Brady doesn't have the wow ability that Patrick Mahomes has. The wow factor of Tom Brady, the special factor of Tom Brady, isn't some escapability, isn't some arm strength, isn't necessarily even football IQ. It's the fact that no matter what happens, Tom Brady wins, and too many people, including myself, doubted him throughout this incredible season that he had. But no more will I doubt the great Tom Brady, a 7-time Super Bowl champion. And again, I think that he proved everybody, the Patriots, wrong, NFL fans wrong. Again, just Tom Brady doing what he does best, which is winning Super Bowls. He's at 7 now. And again, I don't see why there's a reason why this team couldn't be better next year. When you look at the core of their team, I believe they will all be back. They talked about at the parade how a lot of them wanted to regroup and run it back with this team. And Bruce Arians didn't even want to call it running it back. He just wanted to call it we're going for 2. Told guys to their faces on stage like Chris Godwin and Shaq Barrett, you're not going anywhere and things like that. So it wouldn't surprise me if a majority of this team is back. They won't bring back everybody, obviously, but I do think they will franchise one of Levante David, Shaq Barrett, and Chris Godwin. If I had to guess, I think they would probably franchise tag Chris Godwin. And then maybe Levante David could look for one more payday at age 31, obviously, and Shaq Barrett as well. But it wouldn't surprise me if all 3 of those guys were back. I think Leonard Fournette will stay as well. Just with the running back surplus in the draft this year with guys like Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Williams out of UNC, Sermon out of Ohio State. There's a ton of guys, Chuba Hubbard as well out of Oklahoma State. There's a lot of guys coming out of the draft this year. There's a lot of people in free agency this year at the running back spot. It wouldn't surprise me if Fournette just comes back on the cheap to a team that he knows he can win, obviously, a Super Bowl with. Had an incredible playoff run, had an incredible Super Bowl as well. So I would expect Leonard Fournette to stay there too. And again, Tom Brady never gets hurt, never shows fatigue. So while he had this incredible season at 43, what's the difference in Tom Brady's head between 43 and 44? There's no deterioration to his body or anything like that when he doesn't get hit and he doesn't get hurt. This team could very well might be better next year than it was this year. Another year with OTAs, a real training camp, a real offseason, more time to really have a better relationship between quarterback and receiver. You know, Antonio Brown, another guy is coming back. He really has no other options in the NFL. And then if they bring back a majority of their defense, you already know Devin White's only going to get better and better. Todd Bowles did not get a head coaching opportunity, so he's staying. They didn't lose any of their offensive staff members either, like Brian Leftwich or anything like that. And Drew Brees is retiring, which means the Saints are going to take a significant step back this year because they're also $80+ million over the cap. Carolina is still a rebuilding team, but I'll talk about them in my next segment with QB Carousel. And of course, the Falcons too are a little bit in no man's land with a new head coach. Tampa Bay could very well go 14-2 next year, win that division while they're all struggling a little bit and being, mediocre to under 500 type clubs between the Saints, Panthers, and Falcons. And the Buccaneers could be the number 1 seed in the NFC next year on the top with the likes of the Rams and the Packers. And we could be very well having this exact same discussion next year after Tom Brady wins an 8th Super Bowl championship. It wouldn't surprise me at all, and I wouldn't surprise me if this team would be better next year, but I really do believe Tom Brady solidified himself as the greatest team sport athlete of all time. The last thing I want to say in this segment before we get to the QB's Carousel segment after a break is this cool, sort of statistical sort of graph that I saw, and it was comparing 3 phases of Tom Brady's career, and the graphic was claiming that Tom Brady has already had 3 Hall of Fame careers in his just one, obviously, NFL career. So let's get into it. Between the years of 2000 and 2006, Tom Brady had 5 division titles, 3 Super Bowl titles, and 2 Super Bowl MVPs, and 0 regular season MVPs. That career is extremely similar. Again, just the years from 2000 to 2006. So Tom Brady's first 6 years in the NFL is pretty much the exact career arc and accomplishment sort of list as Troy Aikman's, who had 6 division titles, 3 Super Bowl titles, and a Super Bowl MVP. And then when you look at the next phase of Tom Brady's career between 2007 and 2013, it was eerily similar to Dan Marino's career. 6 division titles to Dan Marino's 5, 2 Super Bowl appearances to Marino's 1, 2 MVPs to Marino's 1, and passing leader touchdowns twice to Marino's 3 times. So they had a very similar career, but it was, again, just 6 years of Tom Brady's is almost the exact same accomplishments as Dan Marino's entire career, a top 10 to 7 NFL quarterback ever. And of course, Tom Brady is now in his Joe Montana phase with 4 Super Bowl titles and 3 Super Bowl MVPs and a regular season MVP and 5 Super Bowl appearances from the years 2014 to obviously present day. He's had 3 Hall of Fame careers all into one. If you combine the accomplishments of Marino and Aikman and Montana, then you have the resume and winning pedigree of Tom Brady. I thought that graphics statistical list was a really cool thing that I saw circulating on Twitter. We're going to take a short break here. But on the other side of this short break, I do want to get into the QB carousel. It's going to be the bulk of the segment today. I want to go through each and every team and explain to them their quarterback situation. Not every NFL team, just teams who are looking for a quarterback next season. And that list has expanded since the last time I did this. The only team that has found a solution at quarterback since the last time I made that list was the Rams, and I didn't even include them because at the time we didn't know if Goff was going to be traded. So we're going to get into every single team that needs a new quarterback next season or is expected to have a new quarterback, and I'll give you the name that I predict will be their quarterback heading into week 1 of next season. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masper. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished giving you my rant and take on everything Tampa Bay. Again, I really do believe that there's a path for this team to be better next year and sort of create a little bit of a mini dynasty. Again, I don't think it can be what the Patriots were because of obviously Tom's age, and I don't think even if he could, he would necessarily want to play for that long. Again, I think I could see him playing until maybe like mid to late 40s. I could see. I mean, he's definitely going to play till 44. I think he'll play till 45. And then I think 47 is around the range where I could see him retiring, but who knows? He could play till he's 50, and if that's the case, then we could get, 6-7 years of a Tom Brady Tampa Bay Buccaneer team. But if he can win multiple championships with the Tampa Bay team, people will say that it's a dynasty-level team, that it's on the cusp of doing something like that. And there's no reason, in my opinion, why they shouldn't be favored next year. I understand why some people think the Chiefs should be favored, but again, that defense for Tampa Bay is young, it's fast, it's athletic, it can get to the quarterback. And of course, we saw what they did to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. They pretty much dropped back to every corner and safety and played cover 2, while the front 4 really dominated that Kansas City offensive line. So we know they're really good, and they'll be right back there next year, in my opinion. Maybe even better because of the Saints sort of taking a big step back potentially next year because of some quarterback things. And again, speaking of the quarterback carousel, last year we had some quarterback movement. Obviously, Tom Brady went from New England to Tampa Bay, but this year we have an unprecedented amount of quarterback movement. We've already seen Matt Stafford go from the Lions to the Rams. There's a ton of other quarterbacks that are going to be on the move, plus drafted. I have the list in front of me, and there's at least 15 teams that are probably going to make a quarterback change, 18-plus teams that need, just are in the discussion about who's going to be the quarterback next year. It's not certain. It's not positive. So I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. It might take a couple of segments to go through the entire list, but I'm pretty much going to be, I've done this before where for some of the teams that need a new quarterback, I think I did 5 or 6 of them. I said, who do I think makes the most sense to go there? But this is more of a prediction. We've gotten some reports on where some teams may go in the quarterback department. Some guys are more interested in other teams than others, and of course some people are interested in the Mariotas and the mobile guys versus maybe a Mac Jones or something like that. So I want to just break it all down and give you who I believe will be the quarterback of each of these teams next season. All of the teams that are having quarterback worries / questions whether if they will either be with them next year or if they're going to draft a guy or something like that. So let's get right into it. I want to get some of the easy ones out of the way with first. Let's start off with the Seattle Seahawks. So recently, Russell Wilson has been doing a little bit of a media tour with his wife, Sierra. They went I think, on the Dan Patrick Show for a little bit. There might have been a GQ thing. There was something with a magazine, an interview. And Russell Wilson keeps speaking a lot publicly about some of his displeasures with the Seattle Seahawks organization, one of them being that they think that he personally is upset with how many times he gets hit. Only him and Deshaun Watson have been hit more over the last 5 seasons. Obviously, Russell has been taking huge hits his entire career. He's avoided a lot of them with his escapability, but he's also been sacked, one of the most again in the NFL. Only him and Deshaun. I think only Deshaun's been sacked more than him the last 5 seasons, and that's saying a lot considering Deshaun desperately wants out of Houston. He also said he wants more input on personnel in their draft process and their scouting process, and I think overall Russell Wilson just wants more of a say in Seattle. This is his team. It's his franchise. He is the only reason why they win games. Since he's been drafted, they haven't had a losing season, and we know Pete Carroll can have losing seasons as an NFL coach, so I think Russ deserves a lot of the credit for how good Seattle is. They need help on the offensive line desperately. They need to understand what they're going to do with a guy like Chris Carson. Will they bring him back? Will they not? Shaq Griffin, of course, as well. Will they bring him back? Will they not bring, or will they let him walk the corner, of course? So they have some free agency decisions they have to make, and then they also do need to do whatever they can to build the best possible team around Russell Wilson they can, because in my opinion, he's a top 5 quarterback in the league, MVP level, had a little bit of a down season last year, but still a quarterback rating over 100 for him and all-time great stuff. So a down season for him would be career year for 80-90% of the quarterbacks in the NFL. But at the end of the day, the teams aren't good enough for him to win. Of course, they have defensive issues all over the place, and of course those O-line issues. They got bounced by what was left of Jared Goff and the Rams, who were obviously not on the same page at that point. They lost to them at home. So the Rams came on the road and beat them in a really embarrassing loss for them, at least. Not a way they wanted to end the season. They fire their offensive coordinator, bring in a new guy from LA, who apparently Russell had a lot of say in hiring. But he wants more say. He wants more say in who's going to be drafted, free agents, bringing guys back, just personnel in general. And I think as the face of the franchise and the quarterback, really, Russell Wilson deserves that. But I don't think he's going anywhere. I think the Seattle Seahawks know what they have in Russell Wilson. I don't think they're as poorly run as a team like the Houston Texans are. Well, they can't figure out a way to make Deshaun happy, and they're going to have to trade him at some point. I think the Seahawks can make Russell Wilson happy enough where he will want to say, and I don't see Russell Wilson being a guy that's going to demand a trade or something like that. So I believe he will be the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks next year. I think maybe it was Nick Wright who had a crazy trade with him going to New York and Deshaun going to San Francisco and Jimmy G to Seattle and all that. I don't think something like that's possibly ever going to happen. I think Russell Wilson stays a Seattle Seahawk for the foreseeable future. I don't really see him playing for another team his entire career, certainly not next year, and I think Seattle's management will do him right and give him some more say on some personnel decisions, and hopefully they can get an offensive line that can keep Russell Wilson upright. He's been hurt, and not hurt, but hit far too much in his young career. He's only 30 years old, I believe. Next up, Las Vegas Raiders. There's been a lot of rumors circulating around them. What are they going to do with Mariota? What are they going to do with Derek Carr? Will they go after a guy like Deshaun Watson? I do think they will trade one of their quarterbacks this offseason, but the week 1 starting quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders next year will be Derek Carr. In my opinion, statistically and analytically, he was a top 10 to 12 quarterback in the league last year. The offense was not the issue for the Las Vegas Raiders last year. They were explosive. They had one of the best run games in the league with Josh Jacobs. Nelson Aguilar had a career-saving year pretty much there. Henry Ruggs was a rookie, and it takes receivers and tight ends a year or two to really adjust to the league and be really, really good from the get-go. It's rare that we see guys have incredible rookie seasons like OBJ and Justin Jefferson. They need a little bit more offensive weapons when it comes to the O-line. I think they can be a little bit better. Wouldn't surprise me if they found a bigger-bodied receiver that they like. But they do have an incredible tight end, obviously, in Darren Waller. You could argue he's the best in the league. I think he's top 3 with Kelsey, Kittle, and him. I think you can put them in any order, and I think you could make an argument for it. I think Waller's just the ultimate mismatch in the NFL. It's their defense where they really need help. They need complete revamp of the secondary. Their linebacking core isn't great either, and they could use a real dominant pass rusher as well in the interior. So they need a whole revamp of the defense, and the offense was not the issue, and I don't think quarterback was the issue either. Derek Carr was really, really good for them last year. They were in the playoff hunt and had a playoff spot actually for a long time. They play in a really tough division, so Derek Carr is going to have to play like that top 10 to 12 quarterback each and every year if they want to make the playoffs, considering how good the Chiefs are and how good the Chargers could be potentially as well. So I think Derek Carr was not the issue in Las Vegas, and he will be the week 1 starting quarterback for that team next year, but I do believe they will trade Marcus Mariota, and I'll tell you that team later on. Next up is the Miami Dolphins. Again, they were also in the rumors for Deshaun Watson, of course, and what should they do with quarterback, and some people have speculated they might even draft a kid at 3. I believe the week 1 starting quarterback of the Miami Dolphins next year will be Tua Tagovailoa. Every single move they've done in the offseason has signaled that they like Tua, that they want to build around Tua. Godsey and Studsville worked with the team last year and know Tua's growth from an offensive system standpoint throughout the entire year, know his strengths and weaknesses. Godsey actually took over as quarterback coach the second half of the year for the Miami Dolphins. And of course, Charlie Frye, who they brought in from Central Michigan, worked with Tua in high school in the Elite 11, so he, of course, knows Tua's strengths and weaknesses as well. They need skill positions. That's what they need first and foremost. They need receivers who can get open, receivers that can do something after they catch the ball, and more importantly, just do everything they can to make Tua's life easier. They could also go offensive line and Penei Sewell with a 3rd overall pick, or trade for a guy like Orlando Brown Jr., who's available for the Baltimore Ravens right now. And they just need to completely blow up that wide receiver room. Go get a Devonta Smith, a Jamar Chase, a Rashad Bateman, speed guys, Chris Godwin if you can, Curtis Samuel, things like that. They need speed. They need dudes who can make plays after they catch the ball. Just playmakers in general. They need a whole new running back as well, potentially a guy like Najee Harris or Aaron Jones has been rumored to potentially get some interest from there as well. Quarterback was not the issue for the Miami Dolphins last year. They had 2 really good quarterbacks. Tua Tagovailoa, a rookie, accurate, smart with the football, executed the game plan, but when the game plan wasn't going perfectly, he didn't really adjust to some of those defenses and stunts that they were throwing at him against, specifically what Denver threw against him in Oakland, or Las Vegas and Buffalo threw against him as well, his 3 bad losses. He also had some really good moments against the Patriots and Cardinals, though, and I think he'll be a really good quarterback in this league. Tua Tagovailoa will be my pick to make a jump next year out of all the rookie quarterbacks from this most recent season. I think Tua will make the biggest jump if the Dolphins can structure him with some nice offensive weapons and receivers and running backs who can make plays for him, who can do something off the catch and not just be consistently throwing jump balls that are, the plays immediately stop after the receivers caught the ball. You need to have some guys who can turn a 5 to 8 yard out into, a 15-yard first down. You need those guys on the team. Think about how many guys the Chiefs have and the Bucs have. The Miami Dolphins were last in yards after the catch last season. That's not going to help your young quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. And finally, for this segment, then we'll get to the rest of the teams in the next one. This is going to take me a while. There's so many teams that need a quarterback potentially next year. The Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott's going to be the Cowboys quarterback for a long time. I've heard some speculation that he potentially could be looking at a team like Washington or Indianapolis if he's somehow going to be able to shake free of the franchise tag of Dallas. But I think if they don't agree to a long-term contract, Dallas will franchise tag him again, and he will play under that tag, meaning Dak Prescott will be the Dallas Cowboy quarterback next season. I find it hard to believe that they're not going to make this deal get done. That division is not good. Dak Prescott is probably aware that if he goes to another team, he might not have the golden opportunity to win a division that's right in front of him. Even if he goes to Indianapolis, there's teams like the Titans in that division who could also pose a threat to winning that division like they did last year. And of course, if he stays in division of Washington, he could do that as well, but they don't have the offensive weapons and firepower that Dallas does. Regardless, I think Dak Prescott at worst gets franchise tagged and plays underneath that tag and doesn't get that long-term extension, similar to what happened to Kirk Cousins, and Dallas will play with him next season, and I think they will win that division as well with Dak Prescott at the helm. I believe he will be the Dallas Cowboy quarterback, not just next year, but going forward as well. All right, we're going to call it here. We're going to do another short break, but after this short break, we'll get right back into the QB carousel, give you the rest of these teams who potentially could be looking for a new NFL quarterback. We're a little under halfway through, but I'll speed it up and we'll get to the rest of the NFL teams looking for a quarterback right after this short break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the show. If you're a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. In my last segment, I started the quarterback carousel list that I created, giving you a prediction for each and every NFL team that has a quarterback question or concern heading into next season. I want to continue that list throughout this segment, so let's just get right back into it. The last one I did was the Cowboys, and again, I believe Dak Prescott will be their quarterback next season. Next up is the Lions, who obviously traded Matt Stafford for 2 future firsts and Jared Goff, and I believe they will ride with Jared Goff next season. Brad Holmes, the general manager of the Detroit Lions, is coming from the LA Rams core. He was the guy who was banging on the table back in 2016 the most for the Rams to draft Goff. He is Goff's guy, and of course he brings him along with him to Detroit now, and I believe that Goff might not even just start this season for the Detroit Lions. He could start in the future as well if he has success with this offense, with this new regime, and Dan Campbell, Anthony Lynn. Of course, Brad Holmes, the new general manager, who again is a big Goff guy coming from Los Angeles. I could see Goff being the quarterback in Detroit for a couple of seasons, not just this one, but I believe they will give Goff at least a 1-year trial year to see how he does in the new system and focus their draft pick on hopefully some offensive weapons while they bring back guys like Kenny Golladay as well. Maybe if they went Jalen Waddle, I think they have the 11th overall pick, that could be really good. Or no, I think they have the 7th overall pick. With the 7th overall pick, they could go Jalen Waddle potentially. They could also go in a different direction as well. But I do believe that Jared Goff has some nice offensive weapons in Detroit and will start next season and hopefully look to revive his career there. So for the Lions, I believe Goff will be their starting quarterback next season. Next up is the Saints, who obviously don't have any money in free agency to spend. They're $80 million over the cap. Drew Brees is retired. I believe it will be a combination of Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill being the quarterback for the Saints next year. I believe they just bring back the quarterback room and do a 2 QB system for the first time in NFL history. I think Sean Payton has been bracing for this. I think he really likes Jameis Winston, had some nice plays for them last year when they called upon him. Obviously, Taysom was the starter when Drew got hurt and did well there. I think they're going to use both of them. I genuinely believe the Saints will be running a 2-quarterback system next season. When they want to be a little bit more explosive in the RPO game, they'll go Taysom Hill, but when they want to throw the ball vertically, they'll go Jameis Winston. It wouldn't surprise me if they use both of those guys while also having sort of like a QB competition style in the offseason. But I don't think they'll be adding anybody new. I could see them going a guy like Mac Jones in the first round as well. So look out for them if he falls or something like that. But at the end of the day, I really do believe they're just going to run it back with Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston to try to make both of those guys work. Next up is the Denver Broncos. There's been a lot of talk about them potentially going after Deshaun Watson. I don't think they're going to sell the farm, which would include Judy, maybe even Chubb, and a lot of high draft picks. I think they're going to stick with Drew Lock. I don't think they're giving up on him yet. He's had some nice moments. He's had some bad moments, but he's also had some nice drives put together specifically at the end of games. He's got a lively arm, but I do think they'll bring in some veteran competition, maybe a guy like Andy Dalton or something like that, to compete with Drew Lock a little bit to push him to get better. So that's what I think happens in Denver. For Jacksonville, of course, this is the first team that I think will use, obviously, a draft pick on a quarterback. They have the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft, and we all know how special Trevor Lawrence is. If you look at highlights of Trevor Lawrence's pro day on YouTube, you'll see that every NFL executive / scout, they send people for each and every NFL team, and they're all standing back on the sidelines of like the field at Clemson that Trevor's throwing on to some of the receivers and everything, except for one. Urban Meyer had a front row seat with Dabo Swinney and was pretty much a part of the workout, standing next to quarterback coach Jordan Palmer, who Trevor was working with, and he had a front row seat to the guy he'll be picking number 1 overall. I believe the week 1 starting quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars will be Trevor Lawrence. He'll definitely be starting week 1. I don't think they'll even bring in some veteran competitions to maybe have him sit for a couple of games or learn or anything like that. I think they'll do what the Cardinals did with Kyler Murray, which is pretty much just hand him the job from the get-go. He deserves it. He is maybe the best quarterback prospect ever. He's up there with the likes of Andrew Luck and John Elway and Peyton Manning and all of the elite quarterback prospects to come out of college. He is certainly one of them, and I believe he will be the number 1 overall pick come April. Come next is the Colts, and I believe they will be the team to pull the trigger and trade for Carson Wentz. There appears to be 2 teams in the mix right now. The Philadelphia Eagles are obviously going to trade Carson Wentz relatively soon, according to reports. Could be as soon as today when you're listening to this. The Colts and Bears seem to be the two teams that are interested the most. And then the Colts will snag him for 2 second-round picks and maybe a guy for Carson Wentz and maybe Zach Ertz. I could see Zach Ertz also being thrown in there as well. But either way, I think Frank Reich knows that he's the guy who, if anyone could fix Carson Wentz, it would be him. Wouldn't have to give up a first-round pick, I don't think. And who knows, if Frank Reich can return Carson Wentz to even 70% of that MVP-like form, if he can just perform at Phillip Rivers level or better, then this Colts team could be right back in the playoffs like they were last year, competing for that division with Tennessee. Houston's only going to get worse, obviously, because they're moving off of Deshaun. Jacksonville, while they're adding Lawrence and Urban, are still extremely young and unproven. So who knows, that division could come down to just those two teams, and the Colts need a quarterback, otherwise they'll never beat Tennessee, and I think Carson Wentz is their guy. I think that's who they go with. I think they outbid the Bears for him, meaning who do the Eagles go with? I think they'll stick with Jalen Hurts next season. I think he showed enough to give him at least a 1-year trial run under the new offensive system of Nick Sirianni, and I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch Jalen Hurts this year. Moving on to Atlanta, I just can't seem to shake the fact that I think Matt Ryan won't be the quarterback of this team next year. There haven't been a lot of reports necessarily saying that Matt Ryan is definitely out of San Francisco, but there hasn't been any reports concrete that they're going to stay with Matt Ryan either. Arthur Smith, I think, is a mobile quarterback type of guy. He fixed Ryan Tannehill's career. Before working with Tannehill, he worked with Mariota. I think Justin Fields could be the perfect match in Atlanta as the Matt Ryan replacement. Wouldn't surprise me if they kept Matt Ryan and drafted Justin Fields and had him sit and learn for a year, but I think Justin Fields would be a really cool option in Atlanta next year with the Arthur Smith type offense, still with a boatload of young weapons, but obviously Matt Ryan is nowhere near the level of mobile or athlete that Justin Fields is. He's a complete dual threat guy, and I really think Fields could do some special things in a mobile sort of type of offense, and I think they would rather have a guy like Fields, an athlete, than Matt Ryan. At least I think Arthur Smith would. So if the Falcons go Justin Fields, what happens to Matt Ryan? I think he could get traded to San Francisco. It makes too much sense in my opinion. I think they know that they've reached a ceiling with Jimmy G, and he's not healthy enough to be reliable. There was a report today from CBS that they expect him to be the quarterback of San Francisco next year. I don't buy it. I think Sam Fran knows that they just got leveled up on by the Rams with Matt Stafford, and they have the worst quarterback in that division now, and you're not going to win a Super Bowl with the worst quarterback in your division. I think they go after a guy like Matt Ryan or a guy like Kirk Cousins from Minnesota as well. I would keep an eye on both of those. I could see them going draft Trey Lance too, but I think that after Atlanta goes for a guy like Justin Fields, they call up and trade for a guy like Matt Ryan, who has thrived and won an MVP in the Shanahan system, given the best defense he's ever had. Still some pretty competent weapons, maybe not as good as Atlanta. Obviously better coaching with Kyle Shanahan, and watch San Francisco be right back into the top of the NFC conversation with a quarterback like Matt Ryan. If San Fran moves off Jimmy G, where does he end up? And I think he ends up on the New England Patriots. I think that just makes too much sense that if San Francisco ever moves off of Jimmy G, Bill Belichick wanted to build around Jimmy Garoppolo, wanted to trade Brady before Brady even had turned 40. He's always wanted Jimmy Garoppolo to be his quarterback going forward, and I think Bill Belichick would immediately swoop in and sign Jimmy Garoppolo to a 1-year deal and potentially draft a guy either in the late first round, maybe if they traded back from 15 or something for a guy like Mac Jones. But I think Jimmy G with a weapon at 15 could improve this Patriot offense dramatically. Jimmy Garoppolo would obviously love to be back with the Kraft family, and Bill Belichick had been there before, was happy there before, and obviously could get his stint at becoming the Patriot franchise quarterback, successor to Tom Brady, which was what he was always supposed to be, and that's really what he was drafted for. So I think the Patriots get Jimmy Garoppolo. Moving on to the Jets, I think they draft Zach Wilson. I believe they will be moving off of Sam Darnold. I think they'll get a good return. I think Sam Darnold will be really good somewhere else, depending on where he goes. If he could get a good coaching with a good offensive talent unit, I think Sam Darnold's a playmaker at quarterback and could make a lot of plays for you going forward as an NFL organization and team. But I don't think that his time with the Jets is going to be any further than it is now. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think both of these guys, teams and players, sort of need a blank slate, a fresh start. I think while maybe Robert Saleh and obviously the new offensive coordinator coming over from San Francisco could run a Shanahan-like offense that I think we all know Sam Darnold's talent should thrive in if he's not a bust. But I think both of them, the city, the team, they just need a fresh start. And I think Zach Wilson would be the perfect replacement for Sam Darnold. Very similar type player, sort of this calculated recklessness, really good on his feet. Reminds me a lot of a taller Kyler Murray. Some people have made that comparison. I don't think he's as good as that, but Zach Wilson is really, really good with his feet, accurate, big enough arm, tall enough as well. He's over 6 foot. He's 6'3". If you have a height concern, I personally don't, but obviously some fans and general managers like taller quarterbacks. He's mobile enough. Zach Wilson's biggest issue is facing pressure just right in his face from defensive tackles or somebody like that. So I would be concerned a little bit if Zach Wilson were drafted to a team like San Francisco having to face Aaron Donald like that twice a year. But coming to the AFC East, there's no real dominant defensive tackle force just yet there. But I think Zach Wilson would be a really, really good fit for the New York Jets, and I think that's who they'll go with the second overall pick. Coming up to the Carolina Panthers, they hold the 8th overall pick. They could look to draft somebody, and I think they will if they don't add somebody via trade or free agency. They're the team I'm going to predict gets Deshaun Watson. Apparently they threw in the 8th overall pick in a desperate attempt to try to acquire Matt Stafford, but Stafford obviously wanted to go to LA, and Detroit wanted to do him right, and they obviously got an extra first and Goff for him as well. So we know the Panthers are aggressive in looking for a new quarterback. It wouldn't surprise me if they're the team to say, screw it, 4 first-round picks, and a second-round pick, and maybe a player, all for Deshaun Watson. Send them the Godfather-type offer that they can't refuse. Watson's played in the Carolinas before, obviously was a superstar at Clemson. Would make a lot of sense in a college-oriented type offense with Joe Brady and Matt Rule to bring in a guy like Deshaun Watson with offensive weapons like Christian McCaffrey, Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel if you bring him back. That offense could be electric next season, and there's obviously an opening to be the second-best team in that division now that the Saints are going to take a huge step back. Maybe the Panthers won't be at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers level, but maybe they could be the second-best team in the NFC South as soon as next season. I think they're the team to go all out and get a guy like Deshaun Watson. So if the Texans move off to Deshaun Watson, who's his replacement? I think they go Trey Lance with the 8th overall pick, in which they would have acquired from Carolina. Obviously, Pep Hamilton is the quarterback coach there in Houston now, and he worked really well with a tall, mobile, all the tools type of guy quarterback in Justin Herbert, and that prospect this year reminds me a lot of Trey Lance. That Josh Allen archetype, can move with his legs, also has a big enough arm, 6'4 plus, sort of Cam Newton type hybrid sort of build that Justin Herbert and Josh Allen had. Obviously, Pep Hamilton had a ton of success with Justin Herbert last year, and I think Trey Lance will be the guy that they send down there in Houston, and we'll see what Pep Hamilton and that offensive coordinator can all do down there in Houston with him. The Bears, who do I think they end up with? So obviously at the beginning I mentioned that I think they're going to get outbid in the Carson Wentz sweepstakes. I think he'll end up going to the Colts. Where do the Bears go? I think they're the team to acquire Sam Darnold. They're looking for a playmaker on offense. Matt Nagy's a really creative mind coming over from Kansas City. It's obviously, I think, his, 4th year there as the head coach. Both of them are safe still. I think a competition between Darnold and Trubisky, and I think Darnold is just a more talented version of Trubisky. He's an athlete that can roll the pocket around like Matt Nagy likes to do so well, but he's also a bigger playmaker than a guy like Mitch Trubisky is a way better thrower of the football than Trubisky is as well. And all in all, I just think the play style is very similar between Sam and Mitch, but Sam is obviously just at a different level than Trubisky is, which is why I think Sam Darnold makes a lot of sense in Chicago. And I think once they get outbid by Carson Wentz and the Colts trade, I could see them throwing in a second, maybe a second and a third, in order to acquire a guy in Sam Darnold who could potentially resurrect his career in Chicago. And finally, the Washington football team is also looking for a new quarterback. I mentioned that I think the Raiders are going to be trading Mariota. They're the team that I think gets Mariota. Ron Rivera obviously had huge success with Cam Newton, a dual threat type guy, and I think Mariota showed a lot of people when he had that one short game for the Raiders that he could be a quarterback in the NFL in the right system. An RPO, West Coast offense, quarterback, running type system in Washington could make a lot of sense for Mariota and for him to try to resurrect his career. And again, that incredible defense that Washington has, and they can win that division like they did last year. You just have to not turn the ball over. Mariota does that well enough, as well as providing some great plays on the ground. I think that's where he ends up, and everybody eventually gets a seat at the quarterback table. Those are my predictions for each and every NFL team looking for potentially a new quarterback next year, and that's pretty much my current predictions for everything QB Carousel. Let me know what you think. Where do you have certain quarterbacks going and why? We're going to take a final short break here, but on the other side of this final short break, I will get to everything Los Angeles Lakers and LeBron James, why I think they're relying on him a little bit too much, and why we might have an incredible trading deadline this year in the NBA. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this final short break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network for the final segment of today's show, where I want to give you my thoughts quickly on something interesting that I have noticed coming with the Los Angeles Lakers, and that's the fact that they've played a lot of overtime games recently. They had won 3 straight overtime games this week. And are they too LeBron James dependent? So I think they are. And last year you could have gotten away with that for a couple of reasons. But first of all, I think it just has to do with Anthony Davis having not as great as a season as he did last year. During the playoffs last year, Anthony Davis literally looked like a top 3 to 5 basketball player on the planet. And the Lakers played like they had 2 top 3 players in the world, and of course winning the championship in the bubble at the end of the day. AD doesn't look like that player this year. He's still having a great season, averaging over, I think, 20 or 25 points a game this year, but he's not the same super special Anthony Davis that we saw last season. Now, could it just be because the Lakers are far and away better than everybody else, so they're doing sort of like a Golden State Warrior with KD thing, and they'll be ready again for the playoffs? Maybe, but LeBron James is again top 3 to 5 in minutes every single year, playing the most amount of minutes in NBA history. And if he doesn't play incredible each and every night and give you something special each and every night, then the Lakers don't seem to win the game, or they have to go to overtime against teams like the Pistons, which is obviously not good going forward. Now, last year you could have gotten away with LeBron James having a ton of minutes and having to be special each and every night because we had the huge gap in the season for LeBron James to get fresh, to get healthy. And again, it's like almost the beginning of the year. He played in the finals when it would have only been like he had a whole offseason already to rest and prepare, which is why LeBron could have looked so good in the bubble. He already looks good no matter what the game is, but still, he was refreshed, and everything like that. Now, this season, they're coming off of a short offseason because of the bubble, and LeBron James could be tired by the time we reach next NBA Finals. So if I'm the Lakers, if I'm your fans, I'm a little bit concerned that I'm too LeBron James dependent and reliant. We've seen LeBron James lose finals before and looked like he's a little bit out of gas and giving every single thing he has for the team and everything like that. Other guys for the Lakers need to step up. They got better this offseason. Now, while they do have the short offseason, they did add guys like Schroeder and Montrezl Harrell. I need them to step up and look like all-world type players when it comes in the regular season games against teams like the Pistons. You don't need Schroeder and Harrell to carry you in the Clippers games, but if they could give you, your 25 to 30-plus point nights against bad teams like the Pistons and some of the other teams the Lakers went to overtime with, then LeBron James could rest and be able to take some nights off or sit some fourth quarters and be ready for the playoffs when it matters most, when you have those series against teams like the Jazz, who are incredible this year and have won 18 of their last 20, or 19 of their last 20, I think, and of course the LA Clippers as well, who look like the number 1 teams in the West right now, obviously besides the LA Lakers. So just a thing to keep an eye on. Also, I think we're going to have a really good NBA trading deadline this year. This is just a quick thought before the episode ends. A lot of teams who are always trying to remain competitive and have a finals-like core, teams like the Heat, like the Celtics, and a lot of teams in the West as well, are having sort of weird seasons where they're not winning games they're supposed to, and they're around 500. I think the Celtics are 13-12 or something like that, and the Heat are 3 games under 500. Look for teams like the Celtics and Heat to be big buyers at the deadline to try to make their teams finals level, to catch up with teams like the Nets and things like that, because the Nets not have the greatest record at all right now either, but they'll get things together and they'll work it out, and at the end of the day, they have 3 top 10 players in the world, top 15 I should say, with Kyrie, Harden, and of course Kyrie Irving as well. I blanked on his name there for a second, but at the end of the day, they're going to improve, they're going to get better, and they don't really have any more moves to make. But teams like the Celtics and Heat could look to improve at the deadline. Keep an eye on Victor Oladipo, PJ Tucker, Brad Beal if he did request a trade, but I don't think he will. A name like Zach LaVine's another one to monitor. And, of course, the New York Knicks could also be a team to look at the deadline. They're a team totally in playoff contention in the Eastern Conference, trying to make one of those lower seeds. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they look to make like a big-time move for a go-to scorer or something like that, or a veteran presence. Somebody, I could see them going after a guy like maybe even DeMar DeRozan or something like that to try to spark their team to make sure that they get that 8th, 7th, or 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, and the Knicks could potentially be back in the playoffs. That would be a lot of fun as well. That's going to do it for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, again brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Before I let you go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general. We would love it if you could do all 3 of those things. Again, I have been your host, Alex Masfer. Thank you so much for tuning into today's show, and I will see you all in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.